Hello, Jazzers. This is continuing in our series of how to interpret or phrase jazz music, especially swing. I'm coming from my new office. I don't have the artwork up yet, so hopefully the lighting it's a little bit better than what I've had before. It's also dark outside, so I don't know how it's going to work, but I'm trying to get this done after band class today so I can get it out to you this week. So let's review. It's been a long time, seems like, since we've done this. So when we last left, we were talking about swing tonguing or bebop tonguing. I like to use the term swing tonguing because it was way before bebop, so I don't understand that. But anyway, we talked about tonguing on the upbeats of eighth note phrases, right? Do ba do 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 ba do ba do ba do ba do ba do ba do, right? And we were working on scales like that. I think I cautioned you to make sure it was a pretty light tongue and very smooth. Everything in swing should be smooth unless it's not supposed to be, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the overall feeling of swing needs to be a smooth style. Okay, so today we're going to build upon that. Um, if you're still having trouble and you feel like your eighth notes are sounding really hokey or cheesy or really square or just not very cool sounding, odds are that you are tonguing too hard and you end up accenting those upbeats instead of just lightly tonguing them. A good way to check for this is to play the whole phrase without any tonguing at all. So slur the whole thing and then repeat it and tongue the upbeats, and they should feel and sound very similar. All you're doing with that tongue is briefly interrupting the smoothness of the line. And that just kind of gives it some definition and keeps it swinging and keeps it in the pocket a little bit. So try that if you still feel like you're kind of sounding hokey or not very hip. Okay, so today I'm going to share with you secrets of jazz, and they're not really a secret, of course, but there's 5 rules um, that pertain to jazz style. And I'm taking these directly from an article from uh, Band Directors Talk Shop. So if you want to check my work and see if I am being true to the article, you can look it up there for free. You don't have to be a member or anything. They won't know that you're not really a band director. I think it's called Secrets of Jazz or something like that. So here's 5 rules. Okay. As jazz evolved through time, certain rules developed, and I want to be careful because it's not like you have to sign and say, yes, I promise to follow all of these rules all the time or I will be kicked out of jazz band. It's not that kind of rules. It's more like norms and like this is how things kind of shook out to be, and it was kind of accepted that this is the normal way of phrasing swing style. Okay, they were not written down rules. You didn't, when you joined Basie's band, you didn't get a handbook that had all of these things in them. Players learned them by listening to other players and trying to mimic them, and that's of course how all of jazz got started. But especially all of these kind of normal things, um, these style things, the rules of jazz became that way. If you follow them, you're going to be pretty well on your way to sounding like a jazz player and not sounding like a beginning band student or a beginning jazz player. You'll really be doing it correctly, and that's the goal, I think. I hope that's your goal. Since jazz was not written down but passed down orally, not all players will employ these rules. Jazz is kind of about breaking rules anyway. So as soon as they seem to get a collected sort of, yes, this is how we're going to do it, somebody decides to not do it that way and causes a big stir, and then a new kind of jazz is born usually. Um, but in general, it's good to know what the rule is before you decide to break it, and then you can break it kind of on purpose or with intention and not just because you don't know any better. Okay. Due to the wide variance in individual playing styles and interpretations, um, there are some that don't follow any of these rules. Some players that just don't do it that way, and they still made it in jazz. They're still called a jazz player. So that's kind of the exciting part of jazz. But I really do think that it's beneficial to start with knowing what the rules are, and then you can decide when and if you want to break them. So here we go with rule number 1. Are you ready? This is a secret. Don't tell anyone outside of jazz. Rule number 1 is all eighth notes are legato unless marked otherwise. That phrase, unless marked otherwise, is going to come up a lot. The author of this article just simply calls it UMO, unless marked otherwise. And that's kind of their caveat of all of these rules. Unless it's marked specifically to do it a different way, this is the general rule. So that's what that phrase means. Again, unless you're playing music that is actually written for beginning jazz band players to learn from, these things are generally not marked. So if there is a marking on there, that means they specifically want something different than the rule is. So what's the rule again, now that I've confused you, is all eighth notes are legato unless marked otherwise. So here's an example I'm going to share with you. Okay, so legato eighth notes unless they're marked otherwise. I've got it from a trumpet player because we should be listening to our lead trumpet, and the lead trumpet should be listening to lots of things so that they know how to phrase it correctly. So here we go. So it's quite a bit like swing tonguing, right? They're all legato unless marked otherwise. Let's hear it one more time. Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward rule. Again, it keeps things smooth and kind of going forward, but also gives definition to the line. Make sure that you keep it legato. If you're having trouble keeping it smooth, go back to slurring everything and then add just a light tongue. And that should get you sorted out there. Playing jazz should feel easy and it should certainly sound easy. If it seems uncomfortable, you're probably doing something wrong, or you just haven't been around jazz very much and it just is weird to you. But usually, if it sounds uncomfortable or makes you feel uncomfortable, you're not doing it right. It should feel easy. So if you are making it smooth and legato, you should be okay. It's gonna sound pretty great. If the composer or arranger wants to make an exception and have a short eighth note, they will mark it. Finally, something marked, right? Everything else is just understood, but if they want a short eighth note, they will put that in there for you. All right, so rule number 2. Are you ready? All quarter notes are short unless marked otherwise. All quarter notes are short unless they're not. Okay, so similar to all eighth notes being legato, all quarter notes are short. Short in jazz, however, is not the same as short in classical music. Short in classical music is as short as possible. Short in jazz is shorter than normal, but still with some weight and with attitude. Okay, we use the term dot, D-A-H-T, dot. It kind of has a, yeah, don't mess with me attitude toward it. And there's some weight to it. It's not dit, 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 it. That isn't hip, cool, or jazz. It's just blah. But if you use the term dot for those short quarter notes, you're going to have some space in between them, but they're going to still be in the correct style. Okay. I call this, or the author of this article calls it, the Big Bubba notes dot, right? So think of, like some actual substance to those notes. Example 4.1 here shows you what that sounds like on a computer. Hopefully you can do better. One more time. Dot. Okay, we're starting to sound pretty cool. So we have all eighth notes are legato unless otherwise marked. All quarter notes are short unless otherwise marked. Be very careful with these quarter notes, especially when there's more than one of them in a row. The tendency is to rush because you're uncomfortable with the space created by playing those notes short. So you have to be very vigilant, or I can't even say it. Be very sure that you are keeping it right in that pocket and not rushing them. Dot, dot, do that, not dot, dot, do that, right? It's easy to rush them because you're not used to, or you're uncomfortable with the space. The space is part of the music and it deserves to be heard just as much as the actual note that you're playing. So just be very careful. Know that there's a tendency to rush when you have repeated short notes of any kind. Okay, when the composer or arranger wants something other than a short quarter note, they will tell you that. They may not tell you to play them short, but they will tell you if they don't want them short. So just rest in that. Yay, finally something will be marked. All right, rule number 3. All notes followed by a rest are short, unless otherwise marked. All notes followed by a rest are short, unless otherwise marked. So we've been trying to do everything smooth, smooth, smooth the whole time. And if we only play smooth stuff, it becomes pretty repetitive and pretty boring. And it's just not very exciting. So every once in a while, we have to have something that creates some angularity in the line and contrast all of that smoothness. Jazzers use short notes to accomplish this. We've learned that you already know, I hope, after the last 5 minutes, that all quarter notes should be short, and also notes followed by a rest, yes, even eighth notes. So if an eighth note is followed by a rest, they're no longer legato, they're short. And this just helps create some excitement in this otherwise very smooth line. So rule number 1, that all eighth notes are legato, is overruled by this rule. If you're followed by a rest, that's it. This contrast between smooth and angular is what makes jazz pretty exciting and fun to listen to and play, and fascinating to our listeners most of the time. Usually phrases that stop on the beat will do so with a quarter note, and phrases that end up off the beat will be an eighth note. And that's just a way of showing you what they really want it to be short there. Okay, so example 5 here aims to show you what that sounds like. Here we go. Oh, I stopped it too soon. Sorry, trumpet player. Let's give it a go here. 5.1. Okay, so you can see in these examples, I've actually marked it, all of it. I guess I should have said that earlier so I didn't confuse you. These examples are marked as you would play them. In real life, often they are not marked. All these slur marks, all these caret or TP accents are not in the music normally unless it's edited for young players. So keep that in mind. I'm trying very hard to show you what it should sound like, as well as give you an example orally. So here with 5.1, one more time. Okay, So that's pretty much it for rule number 3. Rule number 4 is accent all ties. To give ties a sense of direction, accent them. When dealing with ties, be sure to distinguish those ties that equal to a quarter note and those with a value longer than a quarter. If the tie equals a quarter note, they're short, just like a quarter note would be. But if it's longer than that, then you need to accent them, and usually also you crescendo or decrescendo, possibly, but you do something with us. And the crescendoing part, that's just part of good musicianship, right? You're not going to just sit on a long note and check out and do nothing with it, because that's not very musical. It's not going anywhere. You're not providing any sense of momentum for the line. And that's true in classical music as well as jazz. If you have a long note, you need to do something. You don't just sit there and rot. You have to make it go somewhere or come away from somewhere. In jazz, often long tied notes are crescendoed. Once in a while, I suppose it would be appropriate to get softer as well. So here's example 6-1. Notice that we have our friend unless marked otherwise. This quarter note is not short. The composer wanted it long. So let's see what this sounds like. Hopefully you can see that, right? So you can see that we have, it's marked as a crescendo. The computer, I don't think, does a very good job of doing that. Excuse me. But we do have the accent above it. So bum, do, wah, do, wah, right? I'm a bad singer, but you get the idea. And I think I've told you already that anything longer than a quarter note, you're going to forte piano anyway, unless otherwise told, right? Or unless marked otherwise. One more time. And there's that short eighth note followed by a rest, right? So we're putting together some of these rules. All right, rule number 5. This is the last one. I bet you're excited. Triplets and 16th notes are slurred unless otherwise marked. This has been a word from our sponsor. So this kind of makes sense. And unless you're very diligent, you probably would do this anyway, because it's a whole lot easier. But however, remember that most of the stuff is not marked. So if you're a very conscientious student that has been classically trained and you see a bunch of triplets, you're going to go triplet, 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 and you're going to tongue every one of them. Ba, 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 ba. Doesn't sound like jazz, and it isn't, because we need to slur them to keep that smoothness going around. Also, 16th notes, you're not going to go because one, it becomes very difficult at something like metronome marking 270 or something. It's very hard to do that cleanly, and it's not worth the effort in this instance because it just doesn't sound right, because it isn't. The jazz masters wouldn't play it that way. They would slur all all triplets and 16ths. It just keeps that smoothness that we've been trying to build this whole time. Okay, so here's an example of what it sounds like. Triplets first and then 16th notes later. And at this point, all the trumpet players are glad I didn't do this in class and make them play it all for you, because they would get to some of those 16th notes and go, what? Here we go one more time with slurred triplets and 16ths. Okay. All right. And that's basically it. We have 5 simple rules that almost always are true. Let's see if we can remember what they were. Rule number 1, all 8th notes are slurred unless marked otherwise. Okay. Number 2, All quarter notes are short unless marked otherwise. That's pretty much every time is going to be unless marked otherwise. Rule number 3, all notes followed by rest are short. Say it with me, unless marked otherwise. Rule number 4, accent all ties longer than a quarter note, and also crescendo or diminuendo them so you don't sound boring on the longer note. Rule number 5, triplets and 16th notes are slurred. And all of this is in conjunction with our first plan, which was to smooth out or tongue the upbeats of eighth note phrases so that you can achieve the swing style that way. So if you put these two things together, tongue the upbeats lightly, and these other 5 rules, you're going to make it. It's going to be fine. And if the director or if your section leader interprets it a different way, they will tell you. If the composer wants something different, they will mark it. Most of these things will not be marked. You're just supposed to know it. And I want to encourage you, especially this week, because there's not a lot of music handed out yet, take the time to listen to any jazz, really, like from the swing era, and make sure that you are hearing what this is supposed to sound like. If you have ever taken a foreign language, you know the best way to assimilate it and sound like you're from there is to listen to someone that's from there. And if you're trying to learn jazz and you never listen to it, it's never going to become who you are or a part of something that you can draw from your own experience. So yeah, I get you're probably not going to listen to jazz all the time for the rest of your life, but while you are learning jazz and actively trying to be a part of our group, I really need you to listen, because that's about the best way I can ever figure out to help you assimilate what the style is. And it's fun. The more you know about it, the more you can do with it. Okay, so those are the 5 rules. I may give you a copy of the examples just so that you can have something to look at. So I'll PDF that and if I can figure that out and give it to you. Until then, see you on Thursday. Practice your B flat blues. See ya.